Watanabe was born on May 24th, 1965 in Kyoto Prefecture, Japan, one of the country's most famous prefectures. However, he didn't grow up in the popular capital city. Instead, Watanabe was raised in the northern mountainous area, a very rural city called Ayobe. Watanabe describes his hometown as a place where nothing was urbanized, claiming he was like a wild boy playing in the mountains and fields. This could be why so many of his future works involve adventure or sci-fi, both great genres for those who practice escapism. The lack of buses and shops near his house meant that when Watanabe was done playing in the wilderness, there wasn't much else to do besides chill at home. Sometimes he would watch TV, but not as much as you would think, considering his future career and the fact that most of the other creators we've covered in this series were obsessed with anime or manga from a very early age. But you see, Watanabe had a different passion in his youth, and that was music. Anytime Watanabe had the chance, he was either listening to music or attempting to create his own songs. And it wasn't just one specific genre either. Watanabe was obsessed with multiple genres from around the world, with his musical taste only expanding as he got older. But one band that has been influencing him since he was a teenager is called the Yala Magic Orchestra. If you are a fan of Watanabe's works, finding out he has had a lifelong love affair with music probably isn't that shocking to hear, as Watanabe's talent for using the musical score of his anime to play with the viewer's emotions and enhance their overall experience is one of the many things that make a Watanabe anime so special. Now, I'll be diving deeper into the interesting connections between music and Watanabe's anime in a later segment of this video, because before he would learn how to fuse his two loves, for a while Watanabe would actually drop all of his musical ambitions after realizing one day that it was clear he would never be a professional musician like he dreamed. In an interview with Forbes magazine, Watanabe was describing the process of how he paired the music to the iconic Cowboy Bebop episode Toys in the Attic, which led to him discussing his lifelong relationship with music, claiming that he has been a music freak for a very long time, dating back to when he was very young and actually dreamed of being a musician. But he also admits that whenever it came to making his own music and songs, no matter how hard he tried, even he could tell that, well, he kind of sucked at it. In Watanabe's own words, quote, "When I tried to make my own songs, they were terrible." Now, I'm sure this realization wasn't a great feeling. It can be so crushing to realize your dream you thought you wanted just wasn't in the cards for you. But one thing you'll learn about the Watanabe story is that he is a lesson in the importance of being resilient. Instead of getting depressed that his first dream job wasn't a possibility, he started to put some thought into what other jobs were out there that would still allow him to express himself creatively. It was around the time when Watanabe started junior high that he had gotten really into watching movies and anime. He became obsessed with what actually makes a good movie or show so good. Watanabe's favorite movies of all time are Dirty Harry, Enter the Dragon, and Zatachi, with his favorite anime being the original Lupin III. What's cool is that if you've seen these, you can feel their influence in the majority of Watanabe's works. Anyway, as Watanabe began watching more and more movies and anime, he gradually started feeling like these were things he wanted to create himself and hopefully do as a career. It was after this epiphany that Watanabe decided to move music to something he just wanted to do as a hobby, so he could invest all his real effort into becoming a professional show or film creator. However, Watanabe knew if he actually wanted a shot at making it at his new dream career, he would have to pick between focusing on the animation field or the live action field, because the steps Watanabe would have to take to achieve success in the separate fields were vastly different. Watanabe would ponder on the choice for a while. In fact, it actually wouldn't be until he graduated high school in 1984 2024 that he was finally able to make his decision. All thanks to the fact the year just happened to be an amazing one for Japanese animated films. The 3 anime movies that helped Watanabe decide to move toward animation were Nosuka, Yosei Yatsura 2, Beautiful Dreamer, and Macross, Do You Remember Love? While speaking on the influence these films had on him, Watanabe said, quote, "Watching these anime movies made me think that Japanese animation is far better than Japanese live action. So I decided to go with making anime." And on Yosei Yatsuka in particular, Watanabe said, quote, "So many crazy things happened in a very surreal way. It felt like anything could happen, and that touched me." As you can tell by watching Watanabe's works, he really likes to push the boundaries of genres and what's expected. He has said he never wants to create the same thing twice. And because even back then, Watanabe had some really ambitious and unique ideas, these movies made him realize that he had a way better chance at bringing his more bizarre ideas to life in the most accurate way with animation than with live action. Back then, and even today, animation can just do things creatively that live action just can't, or at least can't in a way that doesn't feel corny or toned down. As a fan of both Eastern and Western animation, I think Watanabe made the right choice because I couldn't see any of his banger works being near as flawless in live action, at least without budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Look, because we actually have an example of the same story being depicted in live action and in animation that is relevant to this video in a later segment, I'll move on from the topic for now, but let us know in the comments, in general, which medium do you prefer watching? Next, Watanabe needed to pick which would be the best anime studio for him to work at if he wanted to be the type of director and creator he envisioned. You see, Watanabe didn't want to produce just any animated works. He wanted to create and direct originals. So after researching which studios best fit his criterias, Watanabe came to the conclusion that there was one studio that easily made the most sense for him to work at, and that was Studio Sunrise. During this time period, and really for a long time after, Sunrise was just killing it. They dominated the entire mecha genre boom, being the producers of many of the most iconic mecha anime like Mobile Suit Gundam, Space Runaway Ideon, and Armored Trooper Votoms, and also just a plethora of other iconic series over the years like City Hunter, Code Geass, Inuyasha, Outlaw Star, and eventually our beloved Cowboy Bebop. That being said, at the time, what really drew Watanabe to Sunrise was that they were making the highest number of new and original titles every year. What this means is, unlike how most anime studios focus on adapting various creators' works from a different medium into animation, like popular manga, light novels, and even video games, Sunrise was notable for putting out many completely original IPs created and owned by the studio. By the way, it's not that there is anything wrong with the fact that most studios mostly do adaptations, because it does just make sense from a financial standpoint, because the IPs come with a built-in fan base that will likely at least check out the adaptation. Now, whether the fan base of the source material will like it or not is a whole other discussion, but either way, Watanabe had little to no interest in adapting other people's works. So he wanted to take the career path that led him to being able to bring his own ideas to life as fast as possible. Watanabe's exact words on why he chose Sunrise was, quote, "When I came around to picking an anime company to work for, I felt that if I joined Sunrise, I might be able to create my own original anime one day. From the beginning, I wanted to make my own original anime, not the movie or some series version of some hit manga or popular novel." So with his mind made up, all that was left for Watanabe to do was take a leap of faith. And so he packed up all of his belongings and traveled traveled 320 miles to Tokyo, Japan, to the location of Sunrise's headquarters. Through some research, Watanabe had discovered that in order to get an official interview with the studio, first he had to pass an entrance exam. Upon arrival, Watanabe was shocked to find out he had already made his first mistake by assuming that professional animation was a fairly casual, laid-back type of industry. Therefore, he had turned up in a t-shirt and jeans, whereas everyone else was in full suits, including the other 6 or 7 people taking the exam. Since it was too late for him to go change outfits, Watanabe just headed over to the test-taking area, where he was given a sheet of paper in order to list his favorite movies and explain why he liked them so much. If the test examiners liked his answers, he would be moved to the next step in the hiring process, which was a face-to-face interview. I think this is a pretty cool idea because a person's favorite shows or movies tells you a lot about them, and why they like them tells you even more, especially if your company is in the business of making them. So if they were looking to weed out the people whose taste and or reasonings didn't fit the vision of their studio, this isn't a bad way to do it. I wish I could get a copy of Watanabe's answers, but all I know is whatever he said got him moved to the next step of the process, where he would be interviewed by 3 interviewers at once. Watanabe says that because he was so young and naive about the world, he actually wasn't nervous at all. If anything, he was too brutally honest with his answers. Basically, instead of glazing the anime the company had put out or answering the questions in a way he could assume they wanted to hear, like most people do in interviews, Watanabe just said how he really felt. For example, one of their questions was about what Watanabe thought of the then recent Sunrise anime, and Watanabe bluntly told them they were, quote, not fun at all. Looking back on this interview now, Watanabe has said that he thinks his answers were a very bad idea. Out of the 3 interviewers, 2 of them was frowning the entire time. However, the last interviewer, Ryusuke Takahashi, who was a respected anime director, screenwriter, and producer who worked for Sunrise, took a liking to Watanabe. Takahashi just found Watanabe very interesting and different than the other applicants. But at the time, Watanabe didn't know he had won over at least one of the interviewers. So afterwards, he was pretty sure he had blew it. But to his surprise, a few days later, he was contacted and told that Sunrise had decided to hire him. Watanabe only later found out that Takahashi had vouched for him after the interview, convincing the other interviewers to give Watanabe a chance. If you ask me, which I know no one is, I'm just a 25k YouTuber, but in my personal opinion, it was the fact that Watanabe had the cojones to be so fearlessly honest in front of the very people who was deciding his fate, even if that meant bashing something they personally worked on. So even if Watanabe himself thinks his honesty back then was a mistake, I disagree. We've learned from several of my creator deep dive videos how important it is for any creative project to have the kind of people working on it that can be brutally honest. Too many yes men can tank a promising project. That's why I appreciate the positive and negative feedback comments on my videos. It's all helpful. Okay, so we've finally reached the point in the Watanabe story where things start to get really interesting. Watanabe's Sunrise years. After joining Studio Sunrise, the first anime Watanabe worked on was Blue Comet SPT Lasner, a series about an alien invasion and subsequent totalitarian world occupation and resistance. The story takes place in a timeline where the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union never ended. This project was actually directed by Ryusuke Takahashi, which Watanabe was really excited about, because besides this being the person who basically got him his job, Watanabe was actually a fan of a previous Takahashi anime called Armored Trooper Votoms. During the production of Lasner, Watanabe did project management, which he describes as mainly a type of house cleaning and general logistics job. Things like driving people around and making phone calls to designers, attempting to get them to hurry up. For lack of a better phrase, it was basically grunt work. These tasks were not something Watanabe enjoyed, as he didn't get a chance to do anything creative at all. Nor did he even get the opportunity to interact directly with Takahashi like he wanted. But that being said, Watanabe understood this lackluster work was a necessary stepping stone toward his dream. Plus, as Watanabe's career progressed and he got to work under different directors with various ways of running things, he would grow to really respect how Takahashi ran his team, describing his time working under Takahashi as very pleasant and that he had a very gentle and friendly personality. The boss having such a positive energy must have been infectious, as Watanabe said that Takahashi's entire studio was always in a good mood. Watanabe preferred this encouraging work environment to the more hostile ones, like when he worked at anime director Yoshiyuki Tomino's studio. Watanabe says that Tomino was always angry and was always screaming. I never got why some bosses are like this. Like, you don't have to love your job or anything, but if the person in charge is always being a a-hole, this will ruin morale and their employees are not going to perform their best. Before we move on, there is one other story about Watanabe's time working on Lasner that I think is really important, because it explains the exact moment when he learned what he needed to do to find his own unique anime creator style. In the aforementioned Forbes interview, Watanabe explains how the Lasner team's schedule was very tight and hard work was always required, but they would always still make time to go out drinking together after all their work was done. The senior employees would even pay for Watanabe's drinks, since they understood he was still new to the industry and didn't make much money yet. Watanabe valued this after work time so much because he actually learned more during his time drinking with the team rather than when he was in the studio. Quote, "There were many episode directors on Lasner, but they were all heavy drinkers that loved sake. That meant I would go out with them often, but in doing so, I found out they were movie freaks. So I really enjoyed the conversations I had with those guys." It was these drunken conversations that taught Watanabe that even though he was an aspiring anime creator, he didn't have to only pull inspiration from other anime he liked. Just like how his co-workers were inspired by live action movies from across the globe, Watanabe realized that if he could bring his various interests and hobbies into his work, it would make his anime stand out, creating a signature style. This is something Watanabe would go on to excel at more than he could ever imagine, as he would eventually help birth entire new genres and or styles of anime, as well as revolutionize anime and music's relationship. Unfortunately, the lessons Watanabe was learning from the Lasner team would end abruptly when one day out of nowhere, Watanabe was informed that Lasner would be finishing early. The suddenness of this news was shocking to him, and because of his low position, he never even found out the details why. After Lasner, Watanabe would go on to work on several more anime as a production manager, like the minor title Batsu and Terry in the classic anime City Hunter. Watanabe doesn't find the time during this period of his life all that interesting, as he still wasn't responsible for any of the creative parts of the productions. Therefore, he hasn't shared many details about it, but he has said that even though he didn't like his task, he still worked as hard as possible and attempted to learn as much as he could from what was going on around him. Now, even though Watanabe wasn't allowed to direct anything at the time, that didn't stop him from telling anyone that would listen that he wanted to direct and sharing his unorthodox ideas for the studio's projects. But in Watanabe's own words, quote, "Everyone wants to do direction, but out of everyone that asked, only the person who proved themselves as being capable was picked up for episode direction." Simply put, Watanabe was just one of many workers at his level that wanted a chance to to prove they had what it took to be the boss of a project's direction. But even amongst all that noise, Watanabe was by far the squeakiest and confident wheel. And so eventually Sunrise would allow him to prove he wasn't just yapping about being ready for the next level, since he did have a reputation of being a hard worker. So as a sort of test, Watanabe was allowed to direct an anime OVA called Dirty Pair. I guess he did good enough because he was given another job as episode director for a title called Mellow Link, and then another called Wataru, and then Abatarian. This stage of Watanabe's career would go on for around 10 titles, which was good because as an episode director, he finally had some creative input, and it also gave him the chance to learn all the technical skills that came with making anime. But he was still unsatisfied when it came to the overall creative side of things, because the episode director was just the support to the main director's vision. As the title suggests, an episode director is in charge of the direction of a specific episode, but the main director is in charge of the vision for the entire series. A single show often has several different episode directors with different styles. However, the main director still has final say over all of their ideas. That being said, a talented episode director can still leave their mark on a series if the episodes they direct stand out as especially liked or good. For example, Megami Ishitani has gained a lot of notoriety lately for breaking the internet every time she directs an episode of One Piece. Her episodes were so well received, she even went on to direct the series 26th opening, which was a banger, and the highly acclaimed One Piece fan letter episode. But by the sounds of it, Megami was likely given a level of creative freedom that then Watanabe wasn't allowed, as Watanabe is on record saying that back then, whenever he would pitch his more unique storyboards with a peculiar direction, the main director would always correct it to a safer direction. This limitation on his creative freedom drove Watanabe crazy, and so he decided to just focus on learning as much as he could, polishing his skills until he could get his shot at directing his own anime one day. Then he would show all the way out. By the time Watanabe started working on an anime called Gundam 0083, he noticed that his skills had seriously upgraded. This gave him more confidence, but this also in turn made him even more frustrated that he didn't have more influence over the stories he was working on. Watanabe wasn't being ungrateful. He was just really passionate about his ideas and wanted to do things differently but couldn't. For example, in the specific instance of Gundam 0083, I guess the ending of this anime was very controversial, and back during the production of the project, both Watanabe and others on the team didn't understand why the main director Ko would end things the way he did. And so when the series finale got a lot of negative feedback, Watanabe always wondered if he was in charge, would his ideas been received better? Full transparency, I've never seen this anime, but apparently besides the ending, it was very beloved and still has a cult following. Watanabe says that fans of Gundam 0083 still come up to him to this day to complain about the ending, and he always has to explain to them that he was just an episode director and had nothing to do with episode 13, the one everyone hated. I'm not going to lie though, I find it kind of funny that some anime fans are lucky enough to run into one, if not the greatest anime director of all time, and instead of asking about any of his many classics he personally created or directed, they grill him about an anime from 1991 that he wasn't even the main director of. And I don't even mean this in a bad way, it just describes anime fandoms perfectly. Every anime fan has a favorite series that means the most to them no matter what. If you're an anime fan, let us know your favorite anime in the comments, or your guilty pleasure anime that'll be your favorite no matter how many series you watch. Over the next few years, Watanabe would continue delivering consistent consistent quality work. And then in 1994, he would get his first big break when he was put in charge of the overall direction of a Sunrise anime called Macross Plus. Macross Plus is an anime that takes place 3 decades after a great war, with the plot revolving around 2 old friends who find themselves rival test pilots in competing projects, while a mutual old flame returns to them with her own secrets, which results in a lot of drama, action, and betrayals. A random fun fact about this anime is that Bryan Cranston from Malcolm in the Middle and Breaking Bad was the dub voice actor for one of the main characters.
Even if I could, I'm not really interested in that. What I am interested in is finding a place where we can go back to nature.
This project was well received and even gained some international popularity, but I am not going to spend too much time talking about it because Watanabe says that even though he is credited with being the main director, in reality he was more like a co-director, with him considering the real director to be Soja Kawamori, who was in charge of the setting and world setup. That being said, this was still the most creative freedom Watanabe was allowed yet, as he was responsible for a wide variety of things like the actual story and the entire direction. And it was thanks to this job that Watanabe now had some experience in leading the overall production of a big project. Having this on his resume is what helped him land his next big gig, which would not only change his life forever, but also the entire medium of anime, as the very first project Watanabe was in total control of would become one of the most iconic and influential anime of all time. We have reached the Cowboy Bebop story, and if you want to help change my life forever and chase my own dream, just hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for the deepest dives on all things anime and manga. The like goal for this video is 201 likes. After Macross Plus, Watanabe learned that Sunrise Studio doesn't actually hire directors. This meant when he had became an episode director, he was effectively let go from his contract with his studio and was now freelance, meaning he could work for any studio or on any project that wanted him. This revelation was a good thing because at the time Watanabe had grown frustrated that he had to compromise on certain ideas while making Macross since he had a co-director. But now under his new circumstance, Watanabe had a much wider pool of projects to go after, and he would be making sure that the next thing he directed, he was allowed to do whatever he wanted. Watanabe described how he felt at the time as his frustration had turned into a huge amount of energy inside of him he would dump into his next project, which happened to be an anime that would eventually be called Cowboy Bebop. Cowboy Bebop is an anime that was released in 1998. The series famously blended several genres, but was primarily a fusion of science fiction, American westerns, noir films, and kung fu movies, while also incorporating a space opera and jazzy feel to its storytelling and soundtrack. Some sources even refer to Cowboy Bebop as an entire new genre of its own. A few specific pieces of media that acted as inspiration for Watanabe's legendary anime are Blade Runner and Lupin III, as well as various classic noir films. The story of Cowboy Bebop follows the eccentric adventures of a ragtag group of bounty hunters traveling through space in the year 2071 aboard their ship, the Bebop. Every installment of the 26 episode anime feels like a mini movie with largely self-contained stories, but there is still an overarching plot that revolves around the protagonist Spike and the antagonist Vicious. One of the things that Cowboy Bebop does best is that every single one of the main crew is written brilliantly, and really so is the antagonist, and really so is the side characters. There are characters in Cowboy Bebop that are only in one single single episode. And some of those single episode characters have more character development than most anime's main characters have in their entire series. Off the top of my head, two of my favorite one episode characters are VP from the episode Heavy Metal Queen and Rocco from the episode Waltz for Venus. But honestly, there are many other great ones to choose from. This might be a weird question, but do you have a favorite single episode character? Okay, next I'm going to give you a brief recap of the turbulent story of how Cowboy Bebop came to be, because I think it's interesting that the now globally popular anime was almost canceled during the project's production and during its season premiere. So fresh off Macross, Watanabe was looking for a new project that he could have total creative freedom over. Lucky for him, there was an event happening on the other side of the globe that would have a butterfly effect that would give him that opportunity. American movie journalist had announced that the Star Wars franchise was planning an epic comeback with The Phantom Menace. This new Star Wars movie was so anticipated that media companies from around the world began predicting there would soon be another boom in fan interest of the space sci-fi genre. This led to a Japanese company called Bandai to put out word that they needed an anime director who could make a really awesome space anime, and that as long as the anime had really cool spaceships and or fighting robots, the director could do whatever they wanted. If you have learned anything from this video, you know the words "can do whatever he wants" was music to Watanabe's ears. Now, Bandai has lots of divisions as they produce everything from anime to games to merchandise, etc. It would be Bandai's toy division that would be sponsoring this anime's production. Watanabe would reach out about the job, and thanks to his now stacked resume, he was given the gig as long as he could follow the one requirement they had laid out, because they thought that cool spaceships would be the key to the show's success, as their ultimate goal was to be able to sell a lot of new plastic models of original spaceships after the show airs, which is understandable because animation is not cheap. To this day, most animated series are produced at a loss, with the hopes of making the money back in the long run through various methods. More often than not though, it's through merch sales. Unless it's some kind of adaptation, then sometimes they make the money back from new manga, book, or video game sales of the source material from the new fans being funneled from the adaptation. An excellent example of this happening is Demon Slayer. I literally did a whole deep dive on how the Demon Slayer anime blew up its manga so much that it revolutionized the anime-manga industry. Even most Western animations live or die by merchandising sales. Just look up a list of popular cartoons that got mysteriously canceled. The answer why is almost always low merch/toy sales. Young Justice and Symbionic Titan are two examples of cartoons that were popular but were canceled for low toy sales. The reason I'm emphasizing just how important merchandising potential is to these companies is because after Watanabe created the concept for Cowboy Bebop, assembled his dream team, and started production, he kinda got carried away with his vision and did nothing the sponsors asked for. Instead of a light-hearted show about neat fighting robots and cool spaceships that would be eye candy to kids and fly off the shelves, Watanabe had created a super mature drama with complex themes and zero fighting robots. The show did have spaceships, but Watanabe had prioritized practicality over marchability. He just wasn't able to bring himself to compromise on his debut anime. And part of his vision was he wanted the spaceships and other sci-fi stuff to look like it could exist in real life just in the future. Unfortunately, after Bandai saw some early footage of Cowboy Bebop, they would pull the plug on the entire project because they thought that the show Watanabe had created had zero chances of selling any spaceships. After this, Cowboy Bebop was stuck in production limbo for a while until Bandai Visual, a new sister company to the toy division, who was looking hoping to create a new anime that could help them make a name for themselves, reached out to Watanabe with an offer. And after some negotiating, they agreed to take over as the anime's sponsor. Bandai Visual felt comfortable doing this because unlike their sister company, they had no interest in selling toys because they made their money through selling the distribution rights of anime globally, primarily focusing on North America. This coincidentally would be one of the best things that could have happened to the series, as an American dialogue director by the name of Mary Elizabeth McGlynn would end up in charge of the series' English dub. And luckily for all future dub enjoyers, Mary just happened to be the same type of rebellious creative that Watanabe is. Let me explain. Cowboy Bebop was set to make its United States debut at a time where anime in general was not that popular in the West. I mean, yes, anime like the Dragon Ball franchise and Sailor Moon have been birthing new anime fans since the late 1990s. But really, it wasn't until Cowboy Bebop aired on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim in 2001 and the rise of the Big Three that anime would catch any real momentum in the United States. Because of this nicheness, Mary assumed most people would never see the Cowboy Bebop English dub. So she decided she would go against the standard rules of English dubbing and make it in her own vision. Basically, the corporate side of English dubbing wanted voice actors to cartoonify all anime characters, to make them extremely simple to understand and just be overly happy all the time. Any seriousness was bad. That way they could market them to the youngest demographic possible. Reference any 4Kids dubs for examples. But Mary became a fan of Cowboy Bebop's script and decided she wanted to create something her team would enjoy themselves. In her own words, she said, quote, "I was like, wow, nobody's ever going to see this. So you know what? Let's just make it for us. Let's take it in a different direction from standard anime voice acting, which is very heightened and big. And let's make it much more cinematic and really dive into these characters." Another way she made the dub so special was she didn't simplify the script for children like other anime did, but made sure the dialogue was as long and complex as it needed to be to capture what Watanabe was trying to say. To me, this all made Mary an icon herself, as Cowboy Bebop's dub is looked at as one of the greatest English dubs ever, and she did this at a time where even average dubs was hard to come by. By the way, Mary also voiced Julia in the series. Cowboy Bebop was an instant hit with Western anime fans, which is ironic because in Japan, it actually got pulled from air halfway through its season premiere by TV Tokyo. The cited reason was too much blood and violence. Bebop was put on an indefinite hiatus, but lucky for us, Cowboy Bebop was picked up by the Wow Wow Network 4 months later. They would release the full 26 episode season uncut, allowing viewers to see the series the way Watanabe envisioned. Real quick, I want to give a special shout out to Japanese composer Yoko Kanno, who's responsible for the amazing music that set the tone for the entire series. Watanabe personally drafted her to the project because he felt she was the only person that could capture the score he envisioned for Cowboy Bebop. Together, they crafted one of the best soundtracks in anime history. Okay, get ready because I'm really excited to talk about Watanabe's next project, which is not just my personal favorite Watanabe anime, but maybe my favorite completed anime in general. After Cowboy Bebop's premiere in 1998, it wouldn't be until 2004 that Watanabe would release his next project, Samauri Champloo, a stylish genre blending anime that uniquely mixed Edo period samurai action with hip-hop culture. And not just because of the hip-hop jazzy soundtrack, but because Watanabe did hip-hop culture justice by incorporating other elements too, like beatboxing, graffiti stylization, and an overall rebellious energy to the status quo of society through the main character's actions, with one of them, Mugen, even having a unique sword style that incorporates unorthodox breakdancing inspired moves. Watanabe has expressed the whole idea of taking something old or that's already been done, like the Edo period settings, and then remixing it with modern elements was inspired by his love for hip hop. Quote, "I felt felt that hip-hop and samurais might have some similarities. In fact, the important essence of hip-hop is its sampling. A musician can pick up old pieces of music and use them like new. Watanabe is referring to how some of the greatest hip-hop instrumentals of all time sample much older music but tweak it to give it a new fresh feel. In addition, Watanabe says he also feels how rappers can only represent themselves one at a time with their microphones reminds him of how samurai can only do the same but with their sword. Him feeling this way resulted in Mugen's entire character design. One of the things that Watanabe has mastered is how to hook people with the very first episode of his anime. Have you ever heard someone be like, you got to watch insert anime till episode 6, then it gets good? Well, that does not apply to any Watanabe anime. Samauari Champloo is the perfect example of this, as its first episode is flawless. In it, you get a grasp of exactly who each of the main characters are. Mugen and Jin's first fight is one of my favorite fight scenes of all time, and the world building is brilliantly set up. The world or setting of Samauri Champloo was so important because after the success of Cowboy Bebop, everyone was wondering what the next Watanabe anime would look like. Would he niche down and become the space sci-fi guy? Watanabe was aware of this expectation, and so by going from the futuristic world of Cowboy Bebop to the Edo period inspired world of Samauri Champloo, he was able to embody his philosophy of never letting them know your next move. By doing this, fans of his work always tap into his new projects because they can't wait to see what he has up his sleeve next. You know what? I'll just let Watanabe himself describe his general philosophy on creating new media projects. This is his response to why he created Samauri Champloo in the first place. Quote, once you have a successful title, you receive a lot of requests to make something similar, and in this case, something like Cowboy Bebop. I have received these kind of requests for more than 20 years. I understand the reasoning behind these requests, but if I went down that road, I would end up doing the same thing over and over again. Ultimately, people would then get tired and lose interest in my work. I also feel I have more variety to offer within myself. With that in mind, I have avoided trying to do similar things. In order to make something great or cool, I need to try something new and to make something from scratch. I believe this is very important for creativity. And if I only imitate what I have done before, I will not be able to make anything great. So I always place great importance on making something new. David Bowie used to say the same thing, and he is someone I greatly respect. Look, there are many reasons why I love Samauri Champloo, the amazing fight choreography, interesting characters, and great storytelling. But one of the most important aspects I have to touch on before we move on is Samauri Champloo's music. The soundtrack of this anime damn near birthed and or popularized an entire genre of music, now called lo-fi hip-hop. Watanabe knew from the beginning that he wanted some kind of hip-hop music to act as the score for Samauri Champloo, but as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, he lacks the ability to make music himself that lives up to his standards. But because he feels music is so important to the anime he makes, just like with Cowboy Bebop, it was important that he drafted the right talent that could do his vision justice. This would lead Watanabe to bring on to the Champloo team various hip-hop DJs and composers, many of who had never worked on an anime before. The team included Shinji Sachuchi Tsuchida of Shaka Zombie, Fat John, Force of Nature, and Japanese music icon Nujabes. Every musician I just mentioned is legendary in their own right and lended to the auditorial euphoria that is the score of this anime, but the person whose style can be felt the most and had the biggest influence is Nujabes. We could easily do an entire video on Nujabes, as he is a legend who has shifted the entire paradigm of music, as well as is responsible for much of the feel of Samauri Champloo sonically. But I'll save much of his lore for a future deep dive on this channel because there is just so much cool stuff there. All you need to know for now is that the music of Samauri Champloo was one of the first things that platformed what is now considered lo-fi hip-hop or jazz hop instrumentals on a global scale. If you look up the oldest lo-fi hip-hop compilations on YouTube, they either all have Samauari Champloo backgrounds or Samauari Champloo AMVs, or are straight up the soundtrack for the anime. The worldwide influence of Watanabe and Samauari Champloo can even be felt in one of my favorite Western animations, The Boondocks. Its creator has cited Cowboy Bebop as an influence, but if you've watched all these shows, it's pretty obvious he pulled more from Samauari Champloo than anything else. You can feel it in the music, fight choreography, the philosophical undertones mixed with satire, and the fusion of hip-hop and Japanese culture. Though Boondocks flip the primary cultural influence, as the story of the show is told from the POV of two Black American brothers. I actually watched the Boondocks first growing up, and then later I watched Samauari Champloo, and I immediately felt the similarities. When I looked into it, so did a lot of other people. I mean, you can find people asking about the similarities on Reddit, and some people have even combined like Samauari Champloo and the Boondocks into like a mashup AMVs. But the strongest example, if you was unconvinced, is if you watch the Samauari Champloo baseball match episode called Baseball Blues, and then you watch the Boondocks kickball episode, The Red Ball. Anyway, the reason I took the time to discuss this is I think it's so cool that Watanabe created a Japanese project that showed respect to hip-hop culture just because he was a fan of it, and then later hip-hop culture made shows and music inspired by Watanabe's creation. A cycle so poetic it could be in a Watanabe anime. Like, did you know that Watanabe even directed a music video for a rap song by Flying Lotus featuring Anderson .Paak? It's called More, and the visuals are so fire and drips with Watanabe's style. And the song is a banger as well, fitting the visuals perfectly. One of my dreams is to create the best Samauari Champloo deep dive on YouTube, so I'll save the rest of my thoughts about the series for that video. Now remember what I stated in the intro, Watanabe has had the greatest run in anime history. This is why I broke down his first two series so much, because I wanted to illustrate how wild it was. He started off his solo director career with back-to-back masterpieces. Most creators are lucky to even get just one in their entire career. But even after Champloo, Watanabe would continue to drop more and more great anime. And as I name them, I need you watching right now to tell us in the comments, what is your favorite Watanabe anime? After Samauari Champloo, though he worked on some side projects and films, his next official anime series wouldn't come until 2012 with Kids on the Slope. Then only 2 years later, he came out with two anime in 2014, one called Space Dandy and another called Terror in Resonance. Then there was Carol and Tuesday in 2019, and at the time this video is being made, he just debuted a new highly anticipated anime called Lazarus. I have watched the few episodes that's released so far, but I can't give my full review until the season's finished. But with that being said, from what I've saw so far, this series has the potential to be one of his best works. The main character Axel is like a fusion of Spike and Mugen when it comes to his fighting style and overall smoothness, but add in he is like some kind of parkour demon. Like for real, he's basically a daredevil. I watched a Watanabe interview where he said through a series of events, he drafted the guy responsible for John Wick's action scenes to help with the action scenes of Lazarus. So far, Lazarus feels like one of those shows where if Watanabe sticks the landing, he'll have another classic under his belt. If you want to watch Lazarus with me, as well as a lot of other anime and manga, follow me over on my Twitch, linked in the description. The only two Watanabe anime I haven't seen yet is Kids on the Slope and Carol and Tuesday, but they're definitely on my list. Oh, by the way, I want to give a big special mention to Space Dandy. It's a super fun and underrated anime. It's more comedic than Watanabe's other works, but it still gets deep at times. A cool fun fact about Space Dandy is Watanabe admitted in an interview that in order to get the funding for the series, he lied to Cartoon Network that the show was a Cowboy Bebop spinoff. Then he just took their money and made whatever he wanted. Terror and Resonance is also really good if if you like more serious anime. It's kinda like a Sherlock Holmes meets Psycho-Pass type vibe. It's one of those shows you will either love or hate depending on your personal taste and ideologies, because the themes and philosophies that are depicted in it are very mature and may rub some people the wrong way. I personally loved it, and Anime News Network gave the anime a A rating, describing the direction as, quote, basically flawless, and that overall it is, quote, just short of a masterpiece.